For this lesson, we were going to introduce you finally to the general functions that we're going to be dealing with in Algebra 2. We like to call these the parent functions. They are the most stripped down basic version of each individual function that we can give you. And we're going to look at the graphical form, and we're going to look at the function form, or the function notation of each, so we can see what the equation looks like and we can see how that relates to the graph. Now, in prior lesson we learned about transformations and how a point or a shape of something could move along a coordinate plane. And so what we're going to do is we're going to combine that idea with each of the parent functions, and that will allow us to graph new functions based off of the original parent function. And so the first thing that we want to do is to get a look at each of the parent functions, look at their equation, and let's learn how to use our calculator to graph these things. And so if we look at the very first function, it's a linear function. And so we know that it's a linear function because it has an understood 1 as the highest exponent for the variable x. And so if you look at this very closely, you can see that this is x to the first power, and that makes it a linear function. And so the linear is the type of function. Now, that first power is called the degree, so the highest exponent in the function is called the degree of the function, and that's going to tell us the type. The degree of the function later on, when we start to solve different types of equations, the degree of the function can also tell us how many solutions there are to the equation, and so we'll get into that in more detail at a later time. So let's take a first look at the first one, a linear function. So f of x equals to x. And so I'm going to just go to the calculator, so you can pull out your handheld calculator, and I'll show you how to kind of use the graphing function here. Now you can see that on the home page we have calculator for A or graph for B, but I like to use the little symbol graph over here on the left, and you can see over there to the left I've got a calculator button, and it's going to bring me to the scratchpad calculator, and of course I can get out of that menu by hitting escape. Now this is the calculator part, so you may have at this point used the calculator part. I want to go to the graphing part by simply hitting that little button, that little calculator button again, and it gives me a graph, a coordinate plane to look at, and it gives me an entry spot to put down my first function. Now if you don't have a entry spot, all you need to do is hit the tab button and it'll give you an entry spot. So I'm going to simply graph f of x equals x, and so I'm going to hit the x button, and then I'm going to simply hit enter, and it gives me f of x equals x. And what this is just a perfect line at a perfect diagonal, 45 degrees. And so this is the same thing as if it were y equals to x, but you remember f of x is taking the place of y now. Now, if I wanted to graph another function on this same graph, I would just need to hit the tab button again to get a second function entry line. And so I'm going to just play around with this so you can see what happens. I'm going to do x, but instead of just having x, I'm going to add a couple to it. And so when I add 2 to my original parent function, you can see that it actually shifts up 2, and we'll get into that in more detail in a little bit. So you can see that there's an actual shifting or transformation taking place when we add 2 to the original parent function. So that's an important concept that I want you to keep a grasp of as we go through this. Okay, so if I want to clear this out, if I want to start with a fresh graph, all I have to do is hit the document button and then the letter B, and it clears it out, and it clears everything out. And so now I need to go back in there. So if I go back to my notes, I can see that the second parent function that I'm going to deal with is a quadratic equation, and the quadratic equation is determined by it having a degree, or an highest exponent of 2. So let's see how we would do that in the calculator. So now when I hit the x button, I need to square it. So right there next to the 4 we have an x squared button, and if I just square it, it gives me x squared, and I can hit enter, and you can see our quadratic. Again, with the same sort of idea, I could graph a second one on here, and I could do x squared, but maybe I want to add 2 to it just like I did the last one. What happens is a transformation takes place, and it moves up to there. So we're going to work with quadratics and try to figure out that relationship. And so I'm going to clear that out again with a document and the letter B. If I go back to my original notes, I can see that my third parent function is a cubic function, so x to the third, meaning the degree is 3, and we're going to be dealing with a cubic. And so I can again graph that by going to the graphing function and hitting x. Now this time I want a third. So we're going to use, right next to the x to the squared, we're going to use a little symbol called the caret symbol, and it's going to provide us a blank exponent. And now I can input 3 or any exponent that I want. And you can see the basic graph of x to the third. Again, if I wanted to do another x to the third, but I wanted to add a couple to it, oops, made a mistake there. You can see here very clearly that the mistake that I made was, instead of adding 2 to the whole thing, I accidentally added 2 inside the exponent. So I want to clear that out. So I'm going to come back here, and I'm going to go to the second one, and I'm going to backspace and delete that function of it. And now I'm going to raise it to the third. Now to get out of the exponent area, I need to hit the right arrow on my mouse pad, and then I can add 2 and hit enter, and now it changes it to the way it's supposed to be. So you can see if you make a mistake with your calculator, it's not really difficult to change. Okay, and then the last parent function that we're going to discuss is the square root function. And you'll learn later on that what this really means is x to the 1/2 power. So the degree is 1/2. And so this creates sort of a different function type. You can see that from the parent function graph, we only have part of the coordinate plane covered, and we'll discuss that in detail later. So let's go just do 1/2. I'm going to hit document B to clear my graph. I go back in there, and so I'm going to do square root. So I'm going to hit Control x squared, so you can see that control button is kind of like your second function, and it enables all of the blue lettering. And then I'm just going to put the x in there and hit enter, and you can see the square root function. Okay, so that's just a basic introduction to the parent functions and how to graph them, and you're going to need to use the TI Nspire graphing calculator throughout the rest of this lesson. So if you ever have any trouble, just refer back to this video to see what keystrokes that we used.